Hello and welcome once again to our weekly teaching. I don't have to go to church to be a good Christian. And I hear this an awful lot. People say, well, I worship at home. I like the story I heard one time, a pastor that I worked with who I think follows our weekly videos. I hope he gets a kick out of this. A person called him up one time and said, well, I'd like to be married in your church. And he said, that's great. Do you have a church that you go to? And they said, no, we worship at home. And he said over the phone to them, well, if you worship at home, why don't you get married at home? And I think the people took offense to that when really they shouldn't have, because I thought that was a very good challenge. When we say we worship at home, I'm going to push back on that just a little bit. Do you? Have you? Will you? Did you do it this week? What made it worship? I don't know that it's possible to do that. I think certainly we get confused with devotion and worship. We can do devotions at home. We're supposed to. That's where we find some way to connect with God, on our own. And that's a devotional thing. But worship is corporate in nature. It's something we have to come together to do. And it's not something that's intended to be done alone or in seclusion. I heard one time that 9:30 is the optimal time to have a worship service. I think that's really true, because if it's any earlier than that, well, it's too early, we can't go. And if it's any too much later than that, we've already thought of some really good excuse as to why we can't go. But I hear a lot of people saying they can't go to church because maybe they're not good enough. And that just really doesn't make any sense to me. It goes back to our fundamental conception about what a church is. Is a church a place where all the good people gather, or is it a hospital for sick souls, which we all to some degree are? I think it's definitely the latter. When we say that we're waiting for the perfect church, well, we're just fooling ourselves, because it will be imperfect the moment that we walk into it. At the same time, because the church has people there, many of whom who are not where we should be, which is most of us, the church can often be a bad witness to the community. I've been a part of churches like this before. I pastored churches before that instead of bringing people in, they chase people off, and that's very bad. In fact, in one of these churches, I went out and removed the word church from the sign, and when I got questioned as to why I did that, I said, well, I'm afraid we'll be sued for false advertising. We're supposed to be a church, and we're not really acting like it. We're fighting and chasing people off. And a church really is like any living organism. It has to breathe in and it has to breathe out. What I mean by that is the church has to breathe in. It has to gather people in. And then it has to exhale and send those same people back out into the mission field. A church that doesn't have the spiritual respiration will not survive. When we make excuses as to why we can't go to church, well, it's not good enough. I don't trust authority. I don't trust organized religion. I think we have to be very careful. That's very shaky ground, because the church is called the bride of Christ. So I often say to people when they say something bad about the church, I say, watch what you're saying about Jesus' wife. I bet he really doesn't appreciate that. The church is not perfect. It never will be until Jesus comes back. But it is one of the tangible signs that Jesus left for us on earth. Jesus died for the church. Jesus is coming back for the church. And I don't think we can honestly look Jesus in the eyes and say that this is something that is unimportant to us. Jesus, you died for something that's really not worth my time. I'm very, very uncomfortable with that. Jesus looked at Peter and he said, Peter, you're the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. And the second part of that we often don't quote is, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. If we're going to withstand the storms of life, that is something that we definitely have to do in community. That is really not something that we can do alone. We often go to church for the wrong reasons. We go there because we want to feel good, and there are times that can happen, but we go to church to honor God. We go to church so that we can support the other people that are there. I'm very much encouraged by people that go to church. I can think of one currently at my church in particular, who can't really see that well anymore and can't hear very well anymore. So in terms of what this person is experiencing at church, it's somewhat limited, but what a wonderful witness to see that person and those like them in church every week on Sunday. Most importantly, we gather on Sundays because the book of Hebrews tells us, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together as you see that day approach. And it's my prayer this week that I would see you on Sunday. Until then, God bless.